Okay, a couple quick housekeeping things that I always do. Our next program is walking the Erie Canal Way Trail. Get the whole title in here. A search for 7 wonders, bathroom, and beer. And this is Lisa Saunders, who's sitting right back there. She is the presenter. And I heard it's very lighthearted and fun. So looking forward to that. That'll be Tuesday, July 15th. So that's coming up. And Steve, I was asked for additional programs. So I need you to fill me in.
I think August 19th, is that right?
Not sure.
Okay, well, in August there'll be Elaine Peters, she's the Jordan Village historian, and searching for the history beneath our feet or something like that. It's going to be about archaeology. She's an archaeologist and conducts days.
Yeah, so that'll be good. That'll be different. So, and there's more to come as we fill in the calendars. Also, don't forget to drop by if you want with friends or family. We're open on Saturday mornings from 10 o'clock to 1 o'clock. There'll be somebody here if you just want to look in the museum. If you had any family from Schroeppel, we do have information on families. We have some genealogies. We have old photos. We have maps and a lot of documents. So please come and bring some people. So the other thing is we have a craft show and silent auction in November, just before Saturday before Thanksgiving. And we need a couple additional crafters. We're kind of looking for someone that does jewelry, maybe somebody that is artistic with paintings, photography, something like that. So if you know of anyone, please get in touch with me or one of us here. That would be great. Thank you. So tonight we welcome again Derek Pratt. He was here last year. He did the conception of the Erie Canal, right? Did I get that right? And so tonight he is going to do Open for Business 1820 on the Erie Canal Trail. And Derek is the Director of Education and Programming for the Erie Canal Museum. So we appreciate you coming again. And that's all I have to say, believe it or not. So I'm going to grab my water. I don't know where it went. Sit down.
All right, well, thanks. And thank you all for coming out. How many people have been to the museum in Syracuse before? All right, a good amount. If you haven't been there, don't worry. We're open 7 days a week from 10 to 4. It's a fun time. I highly suggest coming down. And this is a great year to come out to the museum. 2025 is the bicentennial of the entire canal's opening. And we were talking about that before the talk started. Someone thought there'd been, a misprint here, right? 1820, the canal being open. As you'll see, there's no mistake here. The canal had actually, in central New York, been open for a full 5 years before the whole thing got open. So we're going to look at how the Erie Canal, you can already see the way it was transforming central New York and really New York in general, even before the whole route opened. So let's do a little context though. Before we get to 1820. How did we get there? Well, for one, the Erie Canal, if you're unfamiliar with it, connects Lake Erie, hence the name, at Buffalo to Albany and the Hudson River, and therefore to the Atlantic Ocean. This was an enormous project that took decades. If you're at my last talk, you heard about all the different ways and the debates that people had to build the canal before finally in 1817 New York decided to take on the canal itself and construct it. So they began building on July 4th, 1817, in Rome, New York, right in the middle. And the big reason why they start in the middle is because it was the easiest section to build. This was an enormous engineering task that New York was faced with. This was 363 miles of artificial waterway in a country that up to that point had never had a trained civil engineer in it. We had only exported some primarily British engineers here to New York to do some river improvements. So nobody really knew what they were doing. So they started here in the middle. Additionally, they hoped that they could link the Seneca River to the Mohawk River. And even if they didn't complete the whole thing, it'd still be valuable to have those two important waterways connected. But also, if you connected those two waterways in the middle of the state, the politicians in Albany would have a hard time, not authorizing the rest of the money and just leaving a big ditch in the middle of the state. But most critically, central New York is the flattest part of the whole voyage, or construction. They do, however, face some engineering challenges in those early years. They had to still figure out how to build the prism, or the ditch, as we kind of colloquially call it, on the canal. But also it had to cross over natural waterways, which was a bit of a challenge. They weren't huge streams like the Mohawk or the Seneca River, but they were smaller ones, like the creek I grew up on, Chittenango Creek. That still had to be crossed by what are known as aqueducts, essentially bridges for water. You also have culverts that had to be made and a few locks. And they were also running into, some difficult soil. They had all these stumps they needed to get out. They have to do a number of different things to fix that. But pretty rapidly, though, they are able to complete the middle division. In fact, most of it is done by 1819. And that is when the first ever canal boat takes its first voyage. It's called the Chief Engineer of Rome. It's named after Benjamin Wright, who was the chief engineer, and he was from Rome. They were super creative, as you will see whenever you look at Erie Canal history. So when they first did the groundbreaking, it was a pretty small, subdued affair. There was only one guy from the state, a man by the name of Samuel Young, who was a canal commissioner who showed up. He briefly held the shovel that was going to dig up the first bit of dirt before passing it on to another guy. By October 1819, New York State had kind of learned how to celebrate their accomplishments with the Erie Canal. Governor DeWitt Clinton himself would go out to Rome, along with kind of the who's who of New York politics. And they'd get on board this boat, headed to Utica. Everyone in Utica was kind of, a bit worried. The boat didn't show up. Turns out, part of the wall gave out on the voyage, so they were still working out, how to engineer canals at that point. But they patched it up enough that they were able to float into Utica, and then the next day they took the boat back to Rome. So that's your first voyage on the canal. Later in December, another canal commissioner by the name of Myron Holly would attempt to go all the way from Utica to Montezuma. So that's the extent of the middle division, 90-some miles. However, he tries that in December. You can imagine how well that went. The boat gets frozen in. So nonetheless, though, he probably could have made the whole journey in late 1819, were it not for the fact that he was, trying to take a boat through upstate New York in December. So that brings us to the big year, 1820, when the first year that they would officially open the entire length of the Erie Canal. But before we get there, we got to zoom out a little bit. and look at some context of what's going on across the world. And that will actually come to play here in upstate New York, in these little frontier towns. We'll see impacts of things happening on a global stage, either in 1820 or in the years to come. So globally, one thing that happened that year in 1820, King George III finally died. This is a good reminder that we're a very young country, right? King George is who we declared our independence against less than 50 years earlier, right? The Erie Canal, in a lot of ways, is seen as one of the big iterations of this American experiment that we're undergoing, right? A lot of the rhetoric that gets used throughout the toasts that are made is this is what a free people can do. So that's going on. I don't know why I mentioned the Cato Street conspiracy. Some guy shot the prime minister. Too bad. Anyway, down in Central and Southern America, there were a variety of revolutions happening against the Spanish monarchy. These will actually come to play later in the talk as well. People are across the world following this example that a lot of these folks digging the canal see themselves as setting and throwing off the chains of monarchy to embrace kind of democratic traditions. So, you know, you've got people like Simón Bolívar. In fact, in my hometown of Chittenango, one of the canal settlements is named, what we call it, Bolivar. That's where I went to elementary school. I was shocked to learn that it's not at all how you pronounce that man's name, but nonetheless, that's what you get in upstate New York, right? I just spoke in Charlotte last week. Anyway, 1820 is also the year that the HMS Beagle sets out on its famous voyage with its crew naturalist, Charles Darwin, who, of course, on this famous voyage is going to begin to develop his theories of evolution. And we see this is a time of great scientific and intellectual curiosity. And the canal plays part in the scientific revolution that's going on as well. It's going to be called the birthplace of American civil engineering. And a lot of these new scientific ideas, including a lot of the ideas of Charles Darwin, will move down the Erie Canal. And you'll see it manifested in places like the Oneida community, right? They practice an early form of eugenics, which kind of Darwin's theory of evolution will help develop as well. So yeah, all of this is happening, and the Erie Canal is very much a part of this world. Nationally, meanwhile, probably the biggest thing happening is the Missouri Compromise is going on in Congress. This is the fight over where slavery will be legal throughout the country. Ultimately, you arrive at the Missouri Compromise, this famous compromise that says everywhere south of the Missouri border, plus Missouri, gets to enslave people, and everywhere north will be free. Further dividing the country in a lot of ways, but also keeping the country together for another 30 years or so. And of course, the Erie Canal is going to become a major conduit on the Underground Railroad. It helps spread the ideas of abolition that are growing at this time. It's starting to come to a head by 1820. However, it's still considered the era of good feelings. There's only one political party in the country, the Democratic Republicans. They're starting to split with the Missouri Compromise and some other things. You're seeing factionalism develop. But the Erie Canal is also a result of this era of good feelings. Everyone's kind of, it's right after the War of 1812. Everyone's feeling jazzed up about America and what it can do. And that really helps contribute to the construction of the canal, and getting everyone to agree, yes, we can do this bold new task. And you're also in the middle of what's called the Second Great Awakening. This is a religious revival movement. Oh, nice, I get to talk about this in a church pulpit. That's fun. I don't think Episcopals were super into the Second Great Awakening, but nonetheless, they definitely weren't, now that I think about it. Yeah, there's a lot of these revivalist preachers that are rejecting traditional ideas of Calvinism, the idea of predestination, that you're damned or saved before you're even born, nothing you can do about it. Instead, they're embracing new theologies that say you have a moral obligation to improve yourself in society. And after the Erie Canal opens, this new theology will flood down the canal as preachers move up and down the canal, preaching this new Christianity, and as a result, this area becomes known as the burned over district, burnt over by the fires of religious passion. A lot of the reform movements that will take root along the canal and a lot of the different religious movements that will form here are a result of this Second Great Awakening that's already starting to begin, but it's really going to be jump-started even further by the canal. All right, so there you go. That's what's happening, across the world. Let's zoom back into central New York, though. And we'll start at the home of my museum, Syracuse, excuse me. So, the canal ends up located, originally it was supposed to go a bit further north, up towards the lucrative salt fields that were in kind of Salina at the time, where Liverpool is now. But it was determined that would have required a few extra locks. These guys are new engineers. If they went a little south towards where these two ancient roads, the Genesee Road and Salina, intersected, you'd be on a lot more even ground. You could cut out a few locks. And there was a small community at this crossroads as well, helping to service people traveling on those two roads. The Genesee Turnpike, as it was then, went pretty much all the way across the state from the Mohawk River out to the Genesee River, while Salina Street went up to Salina and the valuable salt trade. This small community, though, it hadn't had a name yet in 1820. They had tried a few times prior to that. First, a tavern owned by a man by the name of Bogardus was there. It's called Bogardus's Corners briefly. He sells it to another guy whose last name was Cossett. Became known as Cossett's Corner. Again, incredibly original. I can't stop emphasizing that. Then, they were like, we're south of Salina. Let's call this South Salina. Amazing. But then finally, around 1817 or though, they did start to say like, hey, what if we had a name that wasn't like super obvious? And they were looking around, everywhere else in upstate New York has these names harkening back to ancient Greek and Roman pasts, right? This is a big era where we're really embracing these former republics and democracies and trying to emulate them. So they applied to the post office to get their town named Corinth. However, there is another Corinth, New York, so that gets rejected. Then they try for Milan. Also already taken. So, they're sitting around wondering what to do, and this community does have a postmaster, even though they don't have a name yet, a man by the name of John Wilkinson, sitting around doing what everyone does, I guess, on the frontier, which is reading romantic poetry by a future Prime Minister of England, actually. And he reads this poem about a city in Sicily that has salt production near it. It has these big hills and a kind of bay. That city is Syracusa in Sicily, or just Syracuse. John Wilkinson puts in saying like, oh, we're pretty similar to Syracuse and Sicily. Let's try that. No one had taken that one yet. So in 1820, they finally give a name to this little crossroads. And that will become one of the canal's great boom towns. So not only does this community get the Erie Canal, it also gets a name. That same year, a journalist by the name of William Stone. He's a New York City journalist, stops by. And he's looking around, checking out this town that's supposed to become, one of the great cities. Well, it has a ton of opportunity, he's being told, especially by kind of the main promoter of the town, a man by the name of Joshua Foreman, who had actually been the first person, if you were at my previous talk last year, he's the guy who proposed a canal for the first time in the legislature. And William Stone famously says to him, "Why, sir, there's nothing here but swamp, and an owl would weep to fly over it." Joshua Foreman famously replied to him, "Yes, but you will live to see it become a city yet." And as we will see, the Erie Canal is going to prove that prophetic, what Joshua Foreman had to say. All right, so let's look at that canal opening. So they named Syracuse in the winter, actually. In April 1820, a few things happened for the canal. One of the first things, April 13th, the state legislature makes it illegal throughout the state to kill muskrats, with one big exception, and that is if you see them anywhere near the Erie Canal. You can kill as many muskrats as you want. Muskrats still to this day are a consistent problem for the New York State Canal Corporation, burrowing into its banks, and they greatly undermine it. The governor just had his boat get washed down on the way to Utica, doesn't want that happening again. So I don't know if that's still legal advice. But also on April 13th, it's an important day, out in Montezuma, at the far western end of the Erie Canal, a new canal boat is launched. This is the packet boat Montezuma. This is sometimes described by canal historians as about a generation ahead of its time boat. It's 76 feet long, 14 feet wide, with 2 cabins. It's built specifically to hold passengers. 76 feet long because that's essentially how big a lock is. They're, I believe, 80 feet long on the first canal and 15 feet wide. You want to just get your canal boat to barely squeeze through a lock. If anyone remembers the day Peckinpah, which used to go between Oswego and Rome, I believe, into the late 90s, that was a super max for the barge canal. They barely fit through the lock here. Or at least that's what I've been told. I don't remember. But anywho, it's built by this man, Comfort Tyler, who himself is a really interesting character, born in Connecticut, like so many more, so many people of his era. He serves in the Revolution, and there's not a lot of opportunities for him in New England. A lot of the land out there had been taken, so tons of these Yankees will move into central and western New York. Comfort Tyler is one of them. He'll show up on the shores of Onondaga Lake. He is sometimes credited with being, along with Asa Danforth, the first white man to boil a kettle of salt. He at least felled the first tree. All the accounts seem to be like, yep, Comfort Tyler did that part of it. Anyway, he becomes pretty well established in Onondaga County. He's its postmaster, he's the county clerk. I believe he's sheriff at one point. He gets sent to the state assembly to represent Onondaga County in the early 1800s. There he meets a fellow legislator by the name of Aaron Burr. Becomes good friends with that guy. After Aaron Burr kills a guy, you might have heard of him, Alexander Hamilton, and Burr's kind of looking around for what to do next. He sees this whole western section of the United States. If you were at my talk last year, we discussed, without the connection of the canal or any major transportation routes, there's this growing divide between eastern and western America, the frontier and the more settled areas. And there's this great fear that the country's going to kind of split in half, east and west. Aaron Burr does not help alleviate that fear because he has some ideas that he might break off a western chunk of America, or maybe parts of the Spanish Empire, like Louisiana or Texas. And one of his good friends is helping him out with that, Comfort Tyler. They will, in 1805, both get charged with treason. Several other people do too. Aaron Bird's the only one who ever ends up going to kind of court for this. But needless to say, the people of Onondaga Hollow weren't huge fans of Comfort Tyler, committing light treason. So they kick him out of town. He actually was kind of in exile in Montezuma. But he soon established himself as one of the most important members of their community out there. He becomes a major advocate for canals. And he will actually get several of the contracts to help build the canal in that area. So he's the guy who's also going to build the Montezuma. He really sees a lot of future in the canal. He actually will build several more boats and buy a bunch of boats. Later on in the canal's history, he's going to attempt to essentially monopolize the passenger trade with a company that owns at least 8 boats. But that's in the future. We're in 1820. So he launches this boat. It's super elegant. And on April 13th, they just take a lock down into the Seneca River and then back up again. Have a swell old time. They wait around for another week, and on April 20th, they're going to do the first full voyage of the Middle Division. Going from Montezuma, one of the big moments is in Syracuse. In Jordan, they hooked it up to some fresh gray horses, the newspapers say. They came in so fast, everyone's feet got covered in water. And everyone was excited by that. The canal had not started to fill up with garbage yet. So you're like, cool, I got canal water on my shoes at that point. And then it goes all the way to Utica. From the other direction, the chief engineer of Rome also comes in around that same time. Also, when it was in Syracuse, it takes a brief detour right next to where the Erie Canal Museum is today, is where a side canal entered the Erie Canal. Originally, this was only 1.5 miles long. It went up to Salina, so they could get that valuable salt. This was creatively called the Salina Side Cut. Eventually, they realized, we could extend this canal all the way up to Lake Ontario and to Oswego. They then creatively named that canal the Oswego Canal. So that's the beginnings of the canal that's right next to us, essentially, right now. The Salina Side Cut sees the Montezuma go up it, and that's not the last time this canal is going to enter the story. It would eventually be completed 3 years after the Erie, 1828. So get ready. You've got another bicentennial coming up in 3 more years. And like I said, the chief engineer shows up a couple days later. So that's April. The canal officially opened, though, in May, which was also when DeWitt Clinton, father of the canal, was re-elected governor. And one of his first things he's going to do is go on a tour of his namesake ditch, right? This is his big moment. He got us this canal, it's already open, and it's doing great work. He's going to head up to Utica and take the Montezuma, actually, they'll board that, and head west towards Montezuma. And he's accompanied by Myron Holly, the treasurer of the entire canal project, as well as, very interestingly, Jedediah Morse, a reverend. You might recognize the last name. His son, Samuel F.B. Morse, is the famous artist and then inventor of the telegraph system. This is a huge moment in American history as well. Remember, I said this is this age of scientific revolution. Jedediah Morse, in addition to being a missionary, he's headed out west. Primarily, his goal is to get to know the different indigenous peoples of kind of the Midwest which he does. He provides a pretty important kind of ethnographic survey of all the Native American nations around the Great Lakes Basin. And he also provides some of the most accurate maps of the Midwest as well. He's sometimes called the father of American geography as well. And it's in part because of this voyage that he is going to kind of start on the Erie Canal. They head out from Utica May 21st, and they show up in Syracuse on May 22nd. There's going to be a big party for them. They fire cannons. That's the big thing. I'm impressed that DeWitt Clinton, by 1825, was not deaf. There have been so many cannons fired next to this man's head, seemingly, but not next to his head. But he's in the presence of a lot of cannons getting fired throughout his career, and they continue all the way on to Montezuma. DeWitt Clinton soon turned back. Myron Holley continued into the western section of the canal digging. It was his job to pay everybody, so this is where people are building the canal and where he still has to pay people. So too does Morse. Like I said, he's headed out to the Midwest. And we can already see by this point that central New York is being radically transformed, even after a month or two of operations. And we have a really interesting report from late June at what was then called Lock 8. The way they numbered canal locks at that time, so there's 83 locks on the whole Erie Canal system. They started out, they would number them from Rome. So there are actually like 2 Lock 2s. One that was like Lock 2 East, one was Lock 2 West. So the Montezuma one is originally considered lock number 8. It will eventually be considered lock number 61. But in June, the Onondaga Register had this really interesting report put together by the state that just said what passed through this far western lock in just 1 month. When remember, 2/3 of the whole canal is not even built yet. This is as far west as it goes, so this is the least settled section of the state. So presumably further east, even more stuff is moving up and down the canal. They reported that in that 1 month, there were 146 passages made through the lock. 35 by elegant stage boats with passengers, so boats like the Montezuma, 24 pleasure boats, 13 empty boats, and critically, 74 boats with cargoes consisting of 3,776 barrels of flour, 2,438 bushels of wheat, 334 barrels of pork, 112 barrels of potashes, 776 barrels of salt, 49 barrels of beer, 2,000 stands of arms, and a quantity of butter, lard, oil, lumber, hams, whiskey, and goods. So, yeah, tons of stuff is moving through this single lock at this point. This is huge. Prior to the canal opening, a trickle of that would have been passing through Montezuma. It used to cost $100 a ton to move a ton of wheat across the state. Now you've got, you've got about 4,000 barrels of flour and about 3,000 bushels of wheat passing through. This is unthinkable for New York in 1816, essentially, for this moving through this single lock. We can already start to see the huge ways that the state's economy is going to be impacted. And note those goods, right? Wheat and flour. Rochester is soon going to evolve into the flour city, F-L-O-U-R, churning out 500,000 barrels of flour a year. We had 776 barrels of salt. Syracuse is, of course, going to become the salt city. 338 barrels of pork. That's another huge industry. Black Rock pork from outside of Buffalo becomes famous across the Midwest. Not in good ways, but becomes famous nonetheless. We also have several other letters written from this time under pen names. One's Cayuga. We don't fully know who that is. The other is Hibernicus. We do know who that is. It's DeWitt Clinton. And they report what they're seeing on their voyages. Clinton sees several thousand board feet of lumber traveling down the canal in these rafts as tons and tons of wood moves west into the growing eastern coast of the United States to build many factories, houses, etc. that form the growing cities. And speaking of salt, we have another really interesting article from September 6, 1820, from the Onondaga Register, complaining about, shockingly, salt taxes. I know, shocking. So, the canal is, remember, built by New York State. New York State takes out, in the end, over $7 million in loans to construct this canal, an enormous amount at the time. They had to figure out how to pay that off. And what they determined they would do was tax what was traveling on the canal to pay it off. One of the biggest things that was taxed was salt. They will impose a 62.5 per barrel tax on every barrel of salt that travels down the canal, which is an enormous amount. However, prior to the canal, the price for a barrel of salt from Salina was $3.50 per barrel. Now the key to transporting things like salt and flour is you have to be able to sell them as cheaply as possible at market. Pretty much anywhere can grow wheat, can also produce salt in some way, at some scale. So in order to compete, you have to sell as cheaply as possible in order to make any money. It's a really kind of paradoxical thing, but that's how selling bulk items works essentially. So you have to eliminate as much overhead as possible. This is where the Erie Canal comes in. They're already reporting in Syracuse that after a year of operations of the canal, the price of that barrel of salt with the 62.5 tax goes from $3.50 to $1.50 or $2 a barrel. So it is significantly cheaper to ship your salt now. Additionally, they're noting that not all the full benefits of the canal are reaching Syracuse yet. Lumber is still fairly expensive. And you need lumber to, boil away the salt, as you can see there, as well as build the barrels that are going to hold that salt. There's a really weird moment in Syracuse history right around this time. So the salt industry is starting to boom, and all that salt needs barrels, right? Salina Street becomes known briefly as Cooper Street because everyone's getting into the cooperage business. Building barrels. In fact, so many people are building barrels because they're selling for more than salt was at the time. The people stopped boiling salt. So then they have a bunch of barrels, and then there's no salt. They will eventually figure this all out, but it does take a little bit of time for everything to work. Additionally, by the end of 1820, these canals are so successful, other parts of the state are starting to say, we want more than just the branch, or just that main Erie Canal through the state. We want to be connected to it. Folks up here along the Oswego River, some of the big people pushing for access to the canal, and obviously you're going to get the Oswego Canal. You've got folks on the Finger Lakes, they want a connection. You get the Cayuga-Seneca Canal eventually. You've also got some of the more out there canals, like the Shenango Canal, the Genesee Valley Canal. They're already starting to call for connections to the Erie Canal by this point in time. Also, upstate New York is already starting to become a tourist destination as a result of this. The Erie Canal is going to help spur an early tourism industry throughout upstate New York, really, the first ever in America. And people want to both see this new canal, this what they sometimes refer to as the eighth wonder of the world, but also you can see a lot of the natural beauty around upstate New York as well. You know, you've got Chenango Falls, Trenton Falls, other falls, there's a million falls, right? That you can travel to, and ultimately, you know, the greatest of the falls you'll see is Niagara Falls, which the Erie Canal pretty much takes you right to almost once it's completed. But yeah, so you've got a lot of folks traveling around. And on July 4th, this is kind of the Erie Canal's coming out party in a lot of ways. This is when New York is really going to celebrate what they have accomplished up to this point. Syracuse had been preparing for months for this big July 4th celebration. It was going to culminate with kind of the real big national official opening of the canal. They send out these press releases. They say, hey, you know, wear your old military uniforms if you're in the War of 1812 or the Revolution. They also say, leave your politics at the door, specifically. Doesn't matter if you're a Federalist or a Democratic Republican. And say, come on down to Syracuse. We're going to celebrate this canal. And ultimately, even though the canal's only been open for like 3 months at this point, 73 boats arrived in Syracuse on July 4th, which is incredible. I want to know what this fleet looked like. They couldn't all be, you know, the classic canal boat we think of. There's probably one sort of hastily put together by folks who are just like, I need something that can float so I can take a few barrels of like flour down the canal. But anyway, they meet in Syracuse on the morning of July 4th. They wait at the 2 locks on both sides of the canal though. A cannon, however, is fired. DeWitt Clinton is on board another canal boat named the Oneida Chief, along with several other canal dignitaries. And a cannon is fired, like I said. DeWitt Clinton, wherever he goes, people have to fire a cannon. At 10 a.m., this is the signal to start. The Oneida Chief is the first boat that comes down. It's been coming from Utica, from the east. It's headed west. And they're all going to meet at the Salina Basin. This is today right next door to the Erie Canal Museum in City Hall, the intersection of the Erie Canal with that Salina side cut. They all meet there, they get off the boat, they then march over to Joshua Foreman's house in what will soon be rechristened Clinton Square. There, the Declaration of Independence is read to them, as well as there's an oration on, you know, what the Declaration of Independence means. For what we understand, you couldn't hear any of it. You know, they didn't have microphones and stuff, and there's like thousands of people gathered here in Syracuse. This has never really happened in upstate New York before at this point in time, right? Especially in Syracuse. Remember, it didn't even have a name in January, right? It is now the center of New York State. There are thousands of people in this community of about 250 celebrating the canal. So you can't hear the speakers. Nobody really knows how to behave in a crowd like that. And then they will move on from Clinton Square, up the Salina side cut for the real main event. You essentially have an early version of the New York State Fair. All of the counties west of the Mohawk River are invited to send you know, their finest agricultural products to this fair. They have a band that rides on top of the boats all the way up there. And you're going to see all these cool agricultural products. And there is a luncheon where people eat a bunch of lunches, but also, critically, they will drink a lot of toasts. 13 of them are official, and then, you know, after you drank 13 toasts, people start coming up with unofficial ones. So, you know, they have your normal ones, you know, they're saluting the 4th of July, and then General Washington, the Revolution, all the elected officials, blah, blah, blah. But then, interestingly, some of the parts, my favorite ones, you've got a toast to the patriotic states of Pennsylvania and Ohio, peopled by free men and interested with us in the great work of internal navigation. May we have the wisdom to understand our mutual interests and the energy necessary for their successful prosecution. So even Ohio and Pennsylvania, they're seeing how successful the Erie Canal is. They're thinking maybe we can have our own canals. And then also, their 11th toast, they cheers the revolutionary struggle in our southern continent. May the blessing of God attend it and conduct it to a successful issue. So yeah, they're taking note of what's going on throughout the world, as well as the country as well. Interestingly though, this whole affair, even after all the toasts, is over by 5 p.m. The Onondaga Register said you wouldn't even know anyone was there. So distinctly not like today's fair. And yeah, that's this big, huge moment. It opens the canal in central New York, and is a harbinger of the huge celebrations that will come, culminating in October of 1825, when DeWitt Clinton rides the Seneca Chief from Buffalo to New York City. This is kind of a test run for them, but they still got to dig the rest of the canal. The Onondaga Register would praise the work of the engineers. They were starting to really get into their groove, figure out how to dig canals by that point. They were also resurveying things. They will find a better route between Palmyra and Lyons. This would not be the last time that would happen. Famously, the Barge Canal has 2 Lot 28s because of a similar incident in Lyons and Newark. You have Lot 28A and 28B when they did another survey where they were like, whoops, we messed up. So I don't know what it is about the geography of the Lyons area, but it is tricky to survey. More critically, the big surveying project to happen is whether to take the northern or southern route in western New York. The big challenge they knew they were going to have to face was how to get over what they called the mountain ridge. This is the Niagara Escarpment. The cliff Niagara Falls falls over. You can kind of see on that map the ridge that runs all the way across New York. Would you go on the northern side of it, the lower part, just kind of skirting along the shores of Lake Ontario until you had to figure out a way to get over the ridge, or go to the south, get up that ridge early, and then pass through the Tonawanda swamps? David Thomas, a canal engineer from Union Springs, he's going to eventually explore this northern route and determine that that is a much better option. A little after July 4th as well, they'll keep digging in the Middle Division, and while the canal had reached Utica, it was just kind of on the outskirts of Utica. They had made it barely connect to the Mohawk River at that point. July 22nd, it opens properly in downtown Utica. It hooks up to Genesee Street. There's also, I don't even know why I include this. Actually, no, this is interesting. There's a decision reached to supply what's called the Northern Canal. That's the Champlain Canal. With water from the Hudson. This provides the canal system with one of its more interesting quirks. A feeder canal at Glens Falls connects to the Hudson River, bringing water into the Hudson. And then, of course, the Champlain Canal ultimately hooks up, or in from the Hudson, and then it hooks up, obviously, down by Albany. So there's this weird thing where the Hudson River both gives the canal water and gets it back. So I don't know, it's kind of considered a unique thing. And there's a few more hiccups, they haven't killed all those muskrats. Parts of the walls keep giving out in central New York, but they rebuild them, and there's a pretty positive projection. So much so that New York State, that strategy of building the canal through the middle, get it done quick, efficiently and have this ditch in the middle of the state, it works. New York State issues another bond for the continued construction in 1821 of the canal, issuing a $151,000 bond with 6% interest. The Erie Canal also helps develop the first ever savings banks in New York City. An early proponent of the canal buys these bonds and tells kind of poor and working class people like, hey, you can put your money in here and get a good return on your money. You can be like, Stephen Van Rensselaer and the other rich folk in New York. And finally, on November 17th, the state legislature authorizes a full $2 million more to continue building the canal for 2 years. All right. One last thing to look at. This is, interestingly, a notice from the Onondaga Register. You can see all of the new land that is going up for sale throughout central New York. There's tons of land now available. It's now open to the public, and people are making a killing selling land, and also a lot of people are speculating on land. Though I will also have you note down towards the bottom, you will see that also parts of the Oneida Reservation seen here are up for sale. This is an important thing for us to recognize about the Erie Canal. There are, of course, the 6 nations of the Haudenosaunee who have lived across upstate New York. The canal will be built through their territory, including what was still legally their land at the time. This is northern Madison County, which at the time had been granted to the Oneidas for allying with America during the Revolution. However, you can see on this map, that land's already starting to get parceled up, and much of it would end up being sold by New York State in these years, really having a devastating impact on the Oneidas. They would eventually be left with only 26 acres of land out of this whole reservation before that kind of starts to reverse in the 90s. Many more would take the Erie Canal west to Wisconsin during the era of Indian removal, as it was called in the 1840s. So an interesting thing to look at from that time period as well. But there you go. That's the Erie Canal in 1820. Maybe I'll come back sometime and talk about 1825 or something. All right. Yeah, Steve.
So I think you and I have talked about this before. I know why the Erie Canal went parallel to the Mohawk River on the east, because that was really the only route to get to the Appalachian Mountains was the Mohawk Valley.
Sure.
But on the west, what I can't figure out is why they went so far south. They didn't parallel the Seneca River from Baldwinsville to Montezuma. It seems like it would have been an easy route.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I know Jonas Baldwin was hoping for. So.
Sure, yeah. I don't know why they don't turn back up around Onondaga Lake. Presumably they probably would have had the lock or something, but yeah, that section's really tricky. You have the Jordan Summit, as it's called, which is this really annoying engineering feature that they had to do that constantly lost water, and there was very few opportunities to get new water into it. So yeah, I don't know, west of Syracuse it does get a little tricky, but I'm not an engineer, so
But and I heard that's why if you go east of Syracuse, there's not one village that has port in the name, because they were all there on the Mohawk River, Utica, Rome,
I can see that. Yeah.
Schenectady. But if you go west, I think there are at least a dozen
Yes.
towns that have port in the name, because they literally were created by the canal. Is that true?
That makes sense to me. Yeah, we've got a lot of our inland ports in western New York. That would make sense. I've never heard that theory before, but yeah, I mean, a lot of the Mohawk Valley towns, they already exist before the canal. Brockport, Millport, Spencerport, they're not places prior to the canal. They grow up solely because it's there, essentially. Great question. Any other questions?
How did they handle the maintenance of the canal back in the 1820s, 1830s? Who was responsible for that section?
Yep, so New York State was responsible for it. You have what's called the superintendent of repair. He would be in charge of kind of the work crew. They have what are called hurry-up boats. These were state work scows that were allowed to break the 4-mile-an-hour speed limit on the canal. Yeah, they were state boats. They would just go wherever they were needed, usually plug up, holes and stuff. And just like today, most of the maintenance is done in the winter time. The hurry-up scouts are there to do kind of spot repairs, make sure the banks don't give out and stuff, or fix them if they had already.
I have sort of a stupid question. Noted for that.
Okay.
When did the salt potatoes come around?
Good question. I know that the salt potato, it's kind of somewhere in myth. I don't know when the exact year is. I know OHA has done some work. I think they saw them first being sold at Syracuse taverns in like the 1870s, but I have to assume they were being made before that.
Somebody said that there was the Irish.
Yeah. So there's significant Irish immigration in like the 1840s, 1850s. So that's probably when they start to kind of get developed.
The potatoes came from up here.
Oh,
The
interesting.
farmers that were growing potatoes up here were throwing away the wheat potato.
Oh,
And they made a deal with the Irish to take the potatoes down.
that makes sense. And it's right on the Oswego
And
Canal.
they started to boil them in the water, but they didn't know it was salt water. And it was salt water, and they loved it.
Interesting.
So anyway, they got it.
Yeah.
Wait, so potato farmers were throwing out the little ones?
Yeah, they were tossing on
What do you call the little ones?
their bee potatoes.
Bee?
Bee. And if you happen to,
Posted 80 potatoes.
if you happen to,
Seconds, they're seconds.
if you happen to talk to somebody in the town, have you ever heard of salt potatoes? The further you go to the west, the further they don't know about it.
Right.
I learned that for the first time in college when all my roommates were flung at it.
All you have to do is you have to turn around and say to somebody, go buy a bee potato, because they're in the stores, and buy a pound of salt. Now you have salt. So, but the reason why I bring it up is I was talking to one of the farmers,
Yeah.
and he was telling me about how his family, years and years and years ago, were selling potatoes.
Oh, that's good to know.
And they originally were throwing them away,
Yeah.
and then they started making money.
It's cool. It's a good opportunity, speaking of making money.
Yeah.
You should check out our museum store. You can buy my book, Erie Eats, about the history of food in the Erie Canal. Salt potatoes are in there, though not in as much depth. I saw there was another question back here.
Just out of curiosity, when did the canal close? Good.
It hasn't. Thing's still open. You can head over to that lock and boats occasionally pass through it. Someday I want to see that drawbridge go up. But the towpath era. So there's 3 versions of the canal. This one that we've been talking about, Clinton's Ditch, opens 1825. The state actually authorizes a new, larger one to be built 1836. 70 feet wide, 7 feet deep. That's not completed until the 60s. But the towpath era canal does not close until the barge canal opens. And in fact, here in central New York, they keep it open for a few more years to local traffic because it does divert so much. Last boat enters Syracuse in, I think, 1823. 1923, yeah, no. This thing only worked for 3 years. Yeah,
Thank you.
yes.
With regards to the barge canal, was the Oswego River canalized at the same time as the rest of it, or did that come later?
I believe the Oswego Canal is. In fact, this section is more trafficked than the western part of the Erie Barge Canal. because it's kind of more efficient to take your boats from the Hudson to Lake Ontario and then cross the lake than to stick to the 15-mile-an-hour speed limit, no wake zone throughout the whole canal. So I'm pretty confident they enlarged the Oswego same time.
All part of the same project.
Yep.
And so I also read that the canal originally was mostly for commercial traffic. The passenger boats were pretty rare in the beginning, that people were still traveling the turnpikes and stagecoaches. Is that true? Or?
Interesting. So the canal is 100% built primarily for cargo. Passenger boats are always kind of a side business on it. But the height of passenger travel on the canal is the first kind of 20, 30 years of the canal prior to railroads. Because once the railroad opens, that is mainly built initially for passengers, and then they're like, oh, we could also haul cargo on it too. Bad revelation for the canal. But I'm sure the early years, yeah, people probably were taking stagecoach. If you really wanted to get somewhere fast, you would take the stagecoaches. But the canal was economical, and you got places relatively speedily. But did still have that 4-mile-an-hour speed limit, which you can make a carriage do better.
I would like to also say that the other day I was on the canal. I spent a lot of my time down in the river, and these 5 boats show up, and as it turned out, they were on their way to Canada, but they got locked into this area here because they couldn't get through the lock because of the rise in the water. And it turned out that these people toured the river from here to Buffalo, and they sang songs, and they got the songs on, I showed you earlier, they got the songs on YouTube, and they also came and sang songs to me. I was sitting down there. But it was an interesting group of people that were traveling the canal, and they had a good time doing it. And this was all during the storm time, and the water was rising, showing the situation as it was. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make sure that Keith has the name that you got to go to on the internet, so that you can go up to his website, and pick that name off so that you can see the story I'm telling you. It's a very interesting one.
Nice. Sure to check that out. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, yeah.
I don't have a question, but just a little information. If anybody who grew up and stayed around Phoenix, all the villages along here, are here because of the canal, because they came with workers of one sort or another with the canal. I didn't even know that my great-great-grandfather had a canal boat. It was, it was past the tales telling in our family. And I found him and his family in 1880 on the census in New York Harbor, on his boat. They got stuck down there in the wintertime, couldn't get back, so they lived there. Kids went to school and stayed in New York City for that winter.
Yeah, that's a classic thing on the canal. There were like floating cities down in New York for the winter time. You'd rather get stuck down there than just in the canal, which would also happen to people. Yeah. Any other questions? Well, you've been a great audience. Please stop by the museum. Also, if you like history talks, we have a regular speaking series at the museum, at least one a month. This month we had a guy talking about Lafayette's journey on the canal 200 years ago. And next month we have one on the Second Great Awakening. A religious studies professor from Colby will be presenting that. Not only can you watch them live at the museum, we also broadcast them on Zoom and record them on YouTube. So if you register, you don't even have to be at the museum or be available at that time. You can always learn more about canal history. So yeah, I'll leave you with that plug.